Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast, brought to you by RaceForThePrize.com. Mexico City, we're going road racing south of the border for the first time since, 2008? The Xfinity Series was here. And a lot of your Cup regulars were there, but I guarantee they don't remember much about Autodromo. So I'm not going to be leaning on those stats too much. You can look at it, but what you really can look at are the advanced statistics in the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet, which you can get your hands on at RaceForThePrize.com. Let's say $20 for the rest of the month, $10 for this weekend. You get Mexico City, Pocono, Elanto, and Roca Calize, or Lime Rock. RaceForThePrize.com, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Get those sheets, get some of this advanced data. So what is the data? What are the data that we are looking at this weekend? Now, I did get the question on Twitter at Race for the Prize. What track is this most similar to? So I just punched it into AI, and AI says probably Watkins Glen, but I would be careful. I'm not really going to lean too much on that. I understand its point of view of, yep, there are some long straight stretches at this track which require high-end speed, but also there are some very technical parts of the track where there are plenty of S's where you got to find that balance. You know, it's always that, like, well, you need to have high-end speed, but you also need to have downforce, and oh yeah, that's racing. So if you want to put all of your eggs in the Glen basket, fine by me, but we just don't know. We'll have a decent idea after practice, obviously, but it blends having that high speed because of the straights, but then there's those S's. And so it says kind of like the Glen. Glen always considered to be the super speedway of road course racing. One thing we can take away is it's not pure speed track. It's not pure technical track. It's a blend of the two. So here we go. What are some of the stats? First thing that I kind of am intrigued by, because at the end of the day, when we were building our lineups, obviously you want the guy that's going to lead the most laps. But from there, we usually are targeting finishing position and place differential, almost like a super speedway type of race. And one of the ways that I thought would be an interesting way of evaluating is to look at their first segment POMs, which is percent of max speed. Basically looks at every one of a driver's laps, and then for each lap it compares it to the fastest lap of that race. So calculate every single lap speed and then compare it to the max speed on each lap. And then it gives you a score, and so then we rate that score from 1 to 100. So for the most, for example, if we look at Chase Elliott, segment 1, he is often very close to the highest speed of the race. So you look at every one of his laps, you compare every lap to the fastest lap of the race, it gets a score, and then we take that score rating from 1 to 100. And so when it comes to running close to the fastest or the max speed of the race, Chase Elliott is your winner in terms of always running towards the fastest. Now what we can do is look at segment 1 and look at their speed. And you would assume that Chase Elliott will be pretty fast, typically starting up front. He's going to be in clean air. He's going to have an easier drive. And so it makes a lot of sense. But he's also just straight fast as well. But what we want to look at, because we are chasing place differential most of these races, who's going to be able to start in the back and make their way forward? Well, we want to see who can actually drive. And so what if, for example, you have speed in the first half of the race, but started in the back, meaning you are not in clean air. If you're able to demonstrate good speed in traffic, then in theory, you're probably a pretty good driver. And if you have demonstrated that in the Gen 7 cars, which is the data we're looking at, the Gen 7 road races, your speed in segment 1 is fast, and you are starting typically in the back, then in theory, going into this race, you're going to be one of those place differential guys that we may want to target. So who are those drivers? Here we go. And what we see is Riley Herbst is one of the guys that jumps up to the top. Decent speed compared to the fastest lap in segment 1. And we look over at where does he start on average? Towards the back. So what we have seen from Riley Herbst, albeit a small sample size, is that he is able to show speed while racing around a bunch of cars. And if he has done that in the past, he can do that in the future. And so then he becomes one of the guys that maybe we target in terms of place differential. Chase Briscoe's next on our little board. We go over and see his starting position, not the best, usually mid-pack, but in that mid-pack area, he is showing speed. Now, one of the problems that we run into is you look at what he does in the second half of the race, and he drops off significantly, meaning he may be able to make some of those gains, but then when he is racing up with probably the top-tier drivers, he's not doing so well. And so that's another thing you can factor in. You can say, oh, well, they're fast at the beginning, and they are doing that in traffic, but maybe they're just better than the bad drivers in the back. And then when they have to race up with more competitive cars, they fall off a little bit. Herbst still has a pretty decent showing here in the last segment, percentage of max speed, whereas Chase Briscoe clearly can be fast around the squirrels, but when he gets up with the actual drivers, he's not on their level yet. We know that Briscoe has a pretty good history in the Xfinity Series at road courses, but then again, it's the Xfinity Series, and when he put together a lot of those really solid performances, it was that COVID era. There was a great divide between the haves and have-nots. It's really hard to put a lot of weight behind what Briscoe did and some other drivers did accomplished in that 2020, 2021 era. Nemechek, another driver, not a lot of speed, but definitely outperforming his average starting position. And so that's one thing to look at. What we really kind of tune in on here a little bit is, of course, drivers that are starting poorly are going to jump up on this type of statistic because their starting position is so low. It doesn't require their first segment speed to be that high. And that's where we see a little bit of a drop-off here. But what's a little interesting is you get guys like Logano, Zilich, and Chase Elliott that are really fast in segment one. And they should be because they're starting towards the front. But when you start towards the front, it's hard to really put a big number up on this board. Yet they still do, which really demonstrates how fast they actually are. And you can see, like I said, 99 for Chase Elliott, 88, 85. We would expect them to be fast because they're running up in clean air. But there are other guys that start up front that are not putting up those numbers. So, again, we're seeing drivers that are really strong. That's one of the statistics you can look at for chasing place differential. Larson is up there as well. Again, it starts probably towards the front. And that should hurt this number right here. But he still charts out higher because he simply is just that fast. When we look at his percent of max speed, his laps are very close to the fastest laps, or the fastest lap. Next stat that I would like to look at is positions finished above expectations per 100 laps versus their starting position. So we're not just looking at positions finished above expectation because if you run more laps than somebody, you're obviously going to have a higher score. So we normalize that by taking their positions finished above expectation divided by 100 or 100 laps. So again, we're looking at who are guys that finish better than what they should. So it looks at where the driver's running and then predicts where they finish based on all the laps in the world, calculates all that stuff. So just long story short, who finishes better than they should. And then, again, subtract starting position because we're chasing place differential. So if you have a really poor starting position, typically, then you're going to have a bigger number, but you also still need to race well. So who runs well but starts poorly? And let's look at who those drivers have been in the Gen 7 car. Again, it's Herbst, small sample size, Cody Ware, who does have a little bit of road racing experience, but this number is definitely inflated, if you want to say that, based on the fact that his average starting position is so terrible. But he's not a complete slug. He's not somebody you completely get rid of. Stenhouse may come as a bit of a surprise for us here. Runs better. I mean, he's had some pretty good Gen 7 races and has finished better than where he should have. Is he consistently fast? No, you can see that. His speed's okay, but he has finished. And at the end of the day, speed and this advanced data, it really just comes down, does the race fall into your lap the correct way with stages and cautions? Those all matter. And playing it correctly throughout a number of races matters. And these are the kind of values that we are probably going to lean towards. Obviously, if a driver has a high continuous palms or a high speed score or a high warp, which we'll talk about in a second, they're going to be priced highly. But the drivers that really aren't the fastest, but still get finishes, like a Todd Gilliland, like a Ricky Stenhouse Jr., they're people that we might want to consider. You're not going to trust them because they're not consistently fast. But when it comes to finishing better where they should, and also starting in the back, Stenhouse, place differential guy, Todd Gilliland, Zane Smith, Priest, Ty Dillon. They're not the fastest cars. They're not the best road course drivers. They're not going to have really great advanced stats. But if we kind of sift through the stats from a fantasy perspective and say, all right, I know these aren't the best cars, but can they score points? And they have demonstrated that they can score points because they're starting towards the back typically, and they have finished above than where they expected. So if we look at, the positions finished above expectation, Stenhouse, really good scorer. Gilliland, really good score. They're not supposed to finish that high, and yet they pull it off. I was going to put up the recent Autodromo races. The last one was your 2008 Corona, Mexico 200. You can look up all those on Racing Reference. I don't think there's too much worth in doing that. You can have some fun looking at, oh, wow, look, Kevin Harvick was in that race. Denny Hamlin won here. Kyle Busch won here 2 decades ago. Don't really care. Next stat I would look at is just their continuous palms, or just, instead of just looking at segment 1 or segment 2, we look at the entire race, and we look at every lap from that driver. How does that lap compare to the fastest lap of the race? And then we calculate. And it gives them a score. Then we normalize that score, rate it from 0 to 100. And so if we were to do that, again, the percent of max speed, who are the fastest. Not a big sample size with SVG, but we're not too surprised by that. Chase Elliott is right there. 99 for Elliott, Reddick, Allmendinger, no surprises. Which drivers are running fast, simply? We take the fastest lap, and we compare all of your laps to that fastest lap. Who is the closest to the fastest lap? Who is the closest to the fastest lap when we look at all the Gen 7 races? Van Gisbergen's ultimate score ranks number 1. Elliott's right there, number 2, not a surprise. Reddick, not a surprise. AJ, Kyle, Chris, Bell. Gibbs has been very strong. Young kids know road racing. There's really not any surprises, and you're going to have to pay for all these drivers, but it is a quick way to figure out, all right, who's been fast in the Gen 7 car at the road courses. Next and the last stat that we'll talk about here, remember, racefortheprize.com, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. If you want Mexico, Pocono, Elento, and Roca Calize, $20. I don't know what that is in pesos. And I don't know if I would accept pesos, although who's accepting the dollar these days? You want Bitcoin to me, how about it? But then again, no one transacts in Bitcoin. Gotta have some stable coin. Solve that problem. Most people, eventually someday, Bitcoin will become used for transaction, but right now no one likes to spend Bitcoin because they see it as a holder of value. You spend your Bitcoin on 2 pizzas, and then a decade later it's worth millions of dollars. Like, oh, why did I do that? So people still hold that in their mind, so no one transacts with Bitcoin. So you need a stable coin, digital currency, so that people can transact, and then also keep Bitcoin as the reserve. Although eventually I think it will become, once it hits 14 trillion, whatever. Back to racing. Warp. Weighted average running position. Why is this one so significant? And a really good stat for us at road courses. So average running position, obviously, is just taking, all right, where are all the spots that you were in? All right, on lap 1, you were in 22nd. Lap 2, you were in 22nd. Lap 3, okay. And then it takes all that, takes all of your positions throughout a race, And then it says, what's the average spot you're in? And it treats every lap the same. It completely ignores all the dynamics of a race. That's average running position. Weighted average running position says, all right, we're going to average out all of your laps. But what we're going to do is, let's say, for example, in stage 1 of a road course race, knowing that you can pit early or play the game, you just run in 30th the whole time. So you have all those laps in 30th position that will then get factored into your average running position at the end. And you may win the race, but your average running position was 20th because you just stayed in the back during stage 1. What weighted average running position is going to do is when it does its calculations of what's your true average running position, it boosts up the laps at the very end, which correlate or connect more towards the finishing position, and has a lower weight on those laps at the beginning when you may have just been minding your own business. Get it? Great. So it basically weights the laps at the end, which are the ones that matter, which are more strategic, which often reflect more strategy and value than the laps at the beginning, which are pretty much meaningless. So when we look at weighted average running position, it's the same who's who. McNow's now on the board. McNow is now on the board. How now, Brown Cow? Strategy maybe reflected. Chris Buescher is up here. Chris Buescher, a guy who I don't think I mentioned, but he is on our. He wasn't on segment 1, but if we look over here and compare segment 1 versus segment 2 speed, he has, I don't want to say notorious or infamously, but I think most people now buy into Blue Collar Buescher, know that he's a very good racer. He's never going to get the respect that he deserves. And one of the first clues to this, although he's good at every track anymore, and RFK has really established itself early in the Buescher career over the last handful of years, where we really started to take notice of the former Road America winner, is that he would always play the game of getting track position and getting these top 10s, and people would be scratching their head like, well, how's Buescher keep getting these top 10s? And you would see plenty of people, myself included, constantly trying to dismiss him as a good road course racer. Oh, well, he gained all his positions just simply by pitting early and playing the stage game. That was true, but so he played the game in stage 1 and stage 2. And then stage 3, he's magically in the top 10. You know what he consistently did was stay in the top 10 and run well around those top 10 drivers. And after doing it time and time again, eventually we all started to wake up to, okay, it doesn't matter how he got there, but what was important is he stayed there. And if he really was just fluking his way, he would have dropped back once in stage 3. The better cars would have eventually passed him more often than not, but they didn't. And that was a little bit of a clue that, hey, I think this guy can drive. So those are the stats I'm looking at. Oh, I skipped the lead. I buried the lead. Those are the advanced stats. How about a more traditional stat as we close out? And since this is the first time we are at this road course, how about we look at previous first times and see who has been the best? So again, we've got a small sample size with SVG. What we're looking at is, all right, what did these drivers do the first time they went to, let's say, Indy, Road America, Circuit of the Americas, the Daytona Road Course, the Roval, Chicago? So when we go into a racetrack with an empty notebook, which team, which driver is the first to figure it out? SVG got that Chicago win, kind of an interesting race, so I don't know if I want to put too much behind it, but we all know Van Gisbergen can race. But Chase Elliott, look at that. When the series first went to Road America, give it to Elliott. Now, I know they had some Xfinity experience, but nonetheless, there he is. 4th at Indy in 2021. Which that one's kind of interesting. Coda first. Again, that was another interesting race. Daytona Road Course. Again, COVID era. Interesting situation. Roval. These aren't really the best indicators of, like, if we're looking at great tracks and great situations. But again, that being said, right, I can come up with like, yeah, that was a weird race. That was an interesting situation. That was, can't we say probably the same thing could unfold this weekend in Mexico City? all the things that went wrong or right or really were weird at any of those Grand Prix road courses where they went to the first time, probably going to play out. And so if you're able to run well or have a decent setup or simply just survive the race, who are the guys that did it? We look at the top of the board. Elliott, Gibbs, it's a small sample size because we're only looking at one race. But then you got Kyle Larson with a couple good finishes. Hamlin with a couple good finishes, who hasn't really been a great road course racer of late. But he has been, as we should expect, Hamlin's a pretty smart guy. Now, I know I went on Twitter and said that his kayfabe WWE personality, him being John Cena trying to play the villain, is annoying. People don't hate Denny Hamlin because he wins too much. People don't hate Denny Hamlin like, some people hated Earnhardt or some people hated Jimmy Johnson, not because of their personality. I think some may have not liked the Three's personality, but they were angry because they're always winning and always beating their favorite driver. As Hamlin said, I beat your favorite driver. That's why you don't like me. That's not really true. That was true of Johnson. That was true of Earnhardt. They despise him because they're like the Yankees or they're like the Red Sox or, you get it, the New England Patriots. People don't dislike Denny Hamlin because of that. They dislike him because he's a phony, because he's fake. He's trying to play the heel. He's not a heel. Some people can play the heel. Hollywood Hogan, babyface forever, turns to heel. How does he do it? People hated him when he was in the W and what he did. It wasn't that he was hated because he was the best. Hollywood Hogan was hated because he played a perfect heel. There are a lot of people who try to play the heel in wrestling, and it just doesn't work. It comes off fake. It comes off phony. And that's what Hamlin is doing. And so a lot of the hate that people are throwing towards Denny Hamlin these days has nothing to do with performance. It has all to do with, and it's not to do with him playing the heel. People like to hate the heel, the villain, like Hogan. But what people really hate or are really annoyed by is when you try to be the villain, he's just not good at it. Denny Hamlin is just not a bad guy. He can throw on the bandana, grow the black beard like Hogan, start his own NWO, and people just aren't going to buy it. The gimmick's not going to work. And the gimmick is not working with Hamlin going out and doing these rehearsed lines. It's just not who he is. He's a great racer. He's an intuitive driver. He's very instinctual. He does his homework, as you can see with these results. But that's a problem with Hamlin. As I think I pointed out, I think most people will agree, yeah, you're right. I think I kind of nailed that, is that it's cool to see him driving well, so just drive well. But he, like other drivers, kind of feels the pressure, right? Kenseth lost his sponsorship, career ended. Kyle Busch lost his sponsorship, JGR, pretty much put him on the end of the road. Hamlin lost his sponsorship too. But unlike Busch and Kenseth, Hamlin is willing to do whatever it takes to get money. He's got a team to support. He's got to keep his ride. And so he has decided that he's going to cook up some gimmick to help him be more relevant. And he is more relevant now, I guess, because he is playing this phony villain. And I guess you got to do what you got to do to make money, to keep him in the field. But we also have to give some respect to Kyle Busch and Matt Kenseth because they weren't willing, to put on blackface and to shuck and jive and jump around and dance for the man to get sponsorship money. Hamlin, and that's what I think maybe upsets some of the people, like, dude, just race. And maybe Hamlin would say, yeah, I would love to just race. But if I don't do this song and dance, then we don't have money, and then I can't really race. So respect to Kenseth and Busch for not playing that game. When their sponsorship money went out and they refused to put on the show, their show ended. And maybe we should give some respect to Hamlin too, because he cares about racing that much and loves his team and wants to win. He's willing to do the song and dance and to make that sacrifice and to tarnish his career to play this role for a little while. Hogan, his career was over as a babyface. And so he was willing to say, let's do the NWO thing. Although he's a great performer and was able to do it in such a way that was pretty amazing, if you remember late 90s wrestling. Anyway, bit of a tangent. Those are some stats. Hope you enjoyed my riff on Hamlin and pro wrestling. Everything is pro wrestling, as they say. Here are the stats. Those are the ones I'm leaning on. Hopefully you have a good Mexico. I'm working all day on Sunday, so I will not be able to watch the race. I'll have to watch the replay. So is it. Got to make money in this life. Work every weekend. What a life. But enjoy Mexico. The Xfinity, maybe I'll get a podcast out to you for that one too. As they say in Mexico City, adios. Or as they say in Minecraft, was it Via Candido? Be with God, go the way of God. Via Candios. I can't remember. No habla español.